Thank you everyone for coming along this evening to listen to me talk about our reciprocal loans with the British Museum. It's the first time we've done anything like this with a national, and I'm delighted to say that it's been really successful. Not only have we strengthened our relationship with colleagues at the British Museum, hopefully paving the way for new partnership projects in the future, fingers crossed, but we also now have some new and rather exotic objects on display in devises. Now, before going on to talk about those loans in any kind of detail, I'd like to start with the Stonehenge exhibition at the British Museum. So the world of Stonehenge opened at the BM in February and it closes in mid-July. That's 5 months on display, but what some of you might not know is it took the best part of 10 years to bring this blockbuster exhibition to fruition, a bulk of the work taking place in the last 5 to 6 years. So this is the preview night. The British Museum is beautifully lit. The star of the show, the Haller sky disc, is on display there, is more frequently known as Mr. Winky Face now. And we also have the mould cape, which is from the British Museum collections. The exhibition was opened by delegates from the Haller Museum, who are also sponsoring the exhibition, as well as the chairman from the British Museum, George Osborne. And here we can see one of the trustees from the British Museum, Grayson Perry. Firstly, the exhibition is absolutely stunning, so please do go and see it if you get the chance. Never have so many beautiful prehistoric objects been brought together and put in the same room. The 5-star reviews for the exhibition are well and truly deserved. It really is stunning. And for those of you who haven't made the trip to London already, the exhibition looks at Stonehenge in the wider context, so not just the monument itself, but instead it focuses on how the stone circle fits into the bigger world picture at the time. The exhibition covers 4,000 years of prehistory from around 6,000 years ago when we see the first British farmers until around 2,800 years ago when there's a massive cultural change and collapse, and we see the end of Stonehenge as a focal point in people's lives, and with a shift towards villages living in smaller settled farming communities. The exhibition is all about connections in exchange, travel and migration, and that's between Britain, Ireland and continental Europe in the age that we call the Age of Stonehenge. The displays tell the story of the people who built these monuments and especially their beliefs about society and the heavens. The importance of gold, the sun and the changing seasons is a theme that is particularly strong throughout the exhibition. So that's my plug for the exhibition. And the one thing that I will say that seems to resonate with the people that I've spoken to about the displays is that it clearly shows the sophistication of people who were living in the European Bronze Age. These people were not primitive by any stretch of the imagination. Now, I personally became involved in the exhibition preparations in 2016, and for the past 18 months or so, I've worked closely with the British Museum team to prepare our loans for display in London. But before going on to describe the work involved with moving the objects from devices to London, I'd like to just briefly show you the objects that we have lent to the exhibition, the objects that are now in London that were previously on display in devices. So firstly, it's our 2-star burials. Firstly, Wiltshire G5, the famous Bush Barrow, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Bush Barrow is located about half a mile to the south of Stonehenge on the top of the Normanton Down Ridge. The barrow was raised over the burial of a chieftain, and it's Britain's richest Bronze Age burial. The man buried inside the barrow was buried with 2 gold lozenge ornaments, one small, one large, a gold belt hook, 2 large bronze daggers, an axe and a ceremonial mace head. The second burial that's on loan to the British Museum is the Shaman burial, Upton Lovell G2A. He was buried in a barrow in Upton Lovell, which is about 10 miles away from Stonehenge. He was a metal worker and a religious leader, and he was buried with a ceremonial cloak decorated with pierced animal bones. And he carried with him a pouch that was decorated with boar's tusks, and inside that pouch was a bronze awl and a set of flint cups. The shaman was also buried with stones that were used for smoothing and burnishing gold, suggesting that he was one of the very few people in the early Bronze Age who understood the science of metalworking. Now, placed next to him in the grave was the body of a woman, and she was placed sitting upright with her head near the top of the surface of the barrow. And she too was buried with grave goods. She had a shale bead necklace and arm ring, and these 2 important people were buried together on top of the ridge that looks out over the river valley that led down to Stonehenge. So those are our 2 star burials that are on display as part of the exhibition in London, but also we have lent some other objects, including some early Neolithic pottery from West Kennet Long Barrow and a bead necklace. So this is our bowl here, just at the back. We have the bead necklace, and we also have 2 bone toggles or bull roarers. So those are now on display in London as well. There's also the flint long-tailed oblique arrowhead from Mardenhenge. It's the finest arrowhead in the country, and the main part of the arrow was found by Jim Leary and his team in 2010. And then remarkably, 5 years later, when they returned to the site to do some more digging, they found the elongated barb buried just several yards away. And one Sunday afternoon, we put the 2 pieces of flint back together, and they were an absolute perfect match. So they have been on display in the Prehistoric Wiltshire Gallery since 2015, and now they are on display in London. You can see here they are displayed with objects from Durrington Wall's Salisbury Museum collections. We also have the gold sun disk from Jugg's grave at Monkton Farley. Now, this was found in 1946 by a man called Guy Underwood. He was a retired lawyer and an amateur archaeologist who was living in Bradford-on-Avon. The disc was buried with 2 skeletons inside a stone kist, and the other grave goods included a pottery beaker and some flint arrowheads, which are now at Bristol Museum, and a piece of stone that might have once belonged to a ceremonial mace head. So those are the objects that are on display at the BM at the moment. And now I would like to talk about the process. So basically what had to happen to get those objects from Devizes to London. So firstly, all of our loans are agreed by the WANS Board of Trustees, and David and I proposed the loan to the trustees in 2020 and it was agreed. Now, we knew that we had to fill the gaps in our display cases resulting from these loans, and so as part of the agreement with the British Museum, we asked for a reciprocal loan. And after some negotiations, we agreed on a number of objects that we could borrow from the BM to fill our 2 empty display cases, and I will talk a little bit more about those later. So the following year in 2021 was followed by masses and masses and masses of paperwork to sort out the logistics for the loans. So we had to think about the insurance, the transportation arrangements, the photography for the catalogue, and lots of other things. And then fast forwarding to January this year, we had help from Pieter Greaves from Dracon Heritage and Conservation. All of our objects were removed from display and photographed from every conceivable angle for condition surveys and packing. At the other end in London, the same process was undertaken by the British Museum conservators to ensure that no damage had occurred in transit, and I'm glad to say that everything was okay. So you can see Pieter here in the slide. She is looking at the beads from West Kennet long barrow, the Marden flint arrowhead, and some of the bone objects from the Shaman burial. And this is me packing the objects up with Pieter. So here I am inside a large cardboard box, one of the boxes that we were using to transport the loans. And you can see here that we are wrapping up some of the objects from Bush Barrow and the Shaman burial ready to go on the lorry to London. Now, you may have spotted on some of the slides, sorry, just going back one step, due to COVID-19 and the very high case rates in the early part of the year, rather than travel to London to unpack the objects myself and condition survey them, I was a virtual courier for the loan, which basically meant that in January I spent the best part of 22 hours online with the British Museum team. So that's the curator, the mount makers and conservators, supervising the unpacking and installation of the loans for display. So you can see here, this is very much a work in progress, right down to which frosting should we use on the glass to cover the fixings on the back of the display. So yeah, this is very much a work in progress. And I watched all of this happen on the computer, and yes, it was an interesting way to do it. I've never been a virtual courier before. You may have spotted on the slides here that the arrangement for both Bush Barrow and the Shaman burial look remarkably similar to how they're displayed in devices. After many discussions with the British Museum conservators, we decided that it would be best to keep the most fragile objects on display on their original perspex mounts, and so we moved the whole lot in situ on those perspex mounts, which was, to be honest, which was music to my ears, because in 2012 we spent days sewing these bone points that you can see here from the Shaman burial onto the piece of perspex that they're displayed on in devices. And it also meant that there would be less handling, so they could be easily transported as they were and then slotted into the British Museum cases. I'm pleased to say that all the objects arrived safe and sound in London, and they are now happily sitting in their new temporary home in the Sainsbury Exhibition Gallery on the ground floor of the British Museum. So let's move on to talk about our loans from the British Museum. And as I mentioned earlier, in return for the objects borrowed by the British Museum, we negotiated a reciprocal loan, grasping the opportunity to tell two new stories in the prehistory galleries, as well as filling the spaces in those now two empty display cases. A bit like the British Museum loan, the first story that I'm going to share with you is about long distance trade connections. And we entitled this part of the display Gold Daggers as Symbols of Power. And we've borrowed three magnificent daggers from the British Museum. We have one from Egypt, one from Mycenae in Greece, and one from in now modern day Iraq. And they help to tell the story of daggers with gold from across the world in the Bronze Age. Gold decorated daggers, like the one from Bush Barrow that you can see here, were a symbol of power throughout Bronze Age Europe and beyond. The Bronze Age, the Bush Barrow dagger may have been made in Brittany or Wessex, and the thousands of tiny gold studs that decorated the wooden handle are made from gold that comes from Cornwall. Now, we don't know for sure in which direction goldworking techniques travelled in the Bronze Age, but there's definite technological transfer of skills and ideas going on via the trade routes across Central Europe that were connected to the movement of amber and tin. And it's very possible that the goldworking technology that originated in Wessex and Brittany radiated out from there, and that the daggers, like the one from Bush Barrow that we can see here, inspired the techniques used to make similar objects across the Mediterranean world. Whatever the case, we're looking at a very connected and sophisticated world in the European Bronze Age. So let's take a look at the first dagger, which is my absolute favourite, and it's the gold dagger from the Royal Cemetery at Ur, which is ancient Mesopotamia, now in the south of modern-day Iraq. So Ur is one of the first cities in human history, and it's said to be the home of Abraham, whose story is told through the book of Genesis. The ancient city of Ur has fascinated travellers and archaeologists since the 17th century, but it wasn't until 1922 that any proper excavations on the site took place. And this was when the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania formed a partnership to start work on the site under the direction of Charles Leonard Woolley. And he went on to excavate the site for the next 12 years. Now, Ur was the first archaeological site to be excavated under the permit from the Department of Antiquities in the new nation of Iraq. And the permit agreed that half of the artifacts recovered would go to the future Iraq National Museum, and that the other half would be divided equally between London and the United States. Now, the excavations produced tens of thousands of artifacts, photographs, letters, reports, and other documents. And today they remain divided among the three museums. Now, sadly, some of the items were looted from Iraq in the conflict in 2003, but the authorities have had some success in tracking them down, and it's very much an ongoing process to get those objects returned to Baghdad. The cemetery had at least 1,800 intact burials, and of these, Woolley identified 660 as belonging to an early dynastic royal cemetery, which dated to around 2600 BC. These burials were elaborate and extremely wealthy, and there was evidence of ritual. And when I say ritual, I don't mean ritual in the way we think about it in early Bronze Age society in Wiltshire and beyond in the UK. I'm talking about, in this instance, human sacrifice. Now, the gold-studded ceremonial dagger on display in devices at the moment comes from tomb PG 1618, and it was identified by Leonard Woolley as coming from one of the smaller, simpler royal graves. Now, Woolley discovered the burial and many others like it at the bottom of a limestone shaft. And at the bottom of that shaft was a small room made from mud bricks. And inside the small room was a wooden coffin. Inside the wooden coffin were the remains of a man laying on his left side with his legs and feet flexed against the wooden floorboards. So here we have a page from Woolley's notebook and an entry for the dagger burial. And then on the right hand side of the slide, we have an image of the objects found with the burial from the 1934 catalogue. So inside the wooden coffin, as I said, we've got a man lying on his left side. You can see him there with his legs and feet flexed against the footboards at the bottom of the coffin. On his skull were 4 headbands made from gold, lapis lazuli, carnelian, and there was also a gold lunate earring. Around his neck, he wore a necklace of gold and lapis lazuli beads. And Woolley also found the remains of what he described as a decayed wig inside the coffin, and that was associated with a gold headband and hair rings. The other objects found with this man included a bronze bucket, an axe, copper bowls, a copper ladle and chisel, and a silver bowl. The presence of the exotic materials shows long-distance trade connections in the 3rd millennium BC. The gold comes from Iran or Asia Minor, the carnelian from Iran or more likely the Indus Valley, and the brilliant blue-coloured lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Now, these were all expensive and highly prized items and demonstrate the importance of the person who was buried in this grave. Here on this slide, you can see Woolley's catalogue card for the dagger, and it says, dagger with electrum blade and gold guard. The wooden handle disappeared and the guard set with gold studs, a poor and rough piece. The blade, type 2F, has no central rib. So here Woolley is describing the dagger as a poor and rough piece. So that really does go to show the standard of objects that he found in the other grave, because this gold dagger is a stunning piece of craftsmanship. Here we go. So this is a picture from the 1934 catalogue showing the grave as excavated, and here you can see with the yellow arrow we've got the gold dagger. The dagger was found pointing upwards in front of the pelvis, and the wood of the handle was decayed, and so the dagger that you see on display in Devizes has a reconstructed handle. There was also no trace of a scabbard. Because the working part of the dagger, i.e. the blade, is made from gold, which is a soft metal, it's highly unlikely that this dagger had a functional purpose, and instead it held a symbolic or ceremonial function rather. So it wasn't used in practical terms. It was very much ceremonial and or symbolic. Gold is also a precious metal, and so the quantity needed to cast a blade like this would have been high, and clearly this shows the value and status of the tomb's occupant. So this is a really remarkable burial, but it doesn't end there. Outside the coffin, there were a number of offerings and 4 other skeletons, which Woolley constituted would demonstrate the presence of a death pit, which you can see on the right hand side of the display. Here we have a drawing from one of his notebooks. So taken from the excavation report, which was published in 1934, if I can just read this to you. We need to use our imaginations here so that we can use this line drawing to imagine exactly what's happening at the bottom of that limestone shaft in that mud brick room. Outside the coffin, against its footboard, there were 3 bronze spearheads, and by them, lying on its side, was a white calcite spill vase and doryite bowl containing animal bones. With them were a number of clay pots, and against the side of the coffin was a large bowl of white limestone, and by it 2 more examples of a clay saucer. Outside the corner of the coffin was a silver bowl, a clay saucer, and farther along the end of the coffin, the remains of 2 large copper cauldrons. A large bowl of white calcite lay against the east side, and a copper bowl in fragments. Beyond the south end of the coffin, the pit or trench was extended to form a death pit. Here there were 4 bodies, all in very bad condition. One had a necklace of lapis-shaped beads, one a silver wire hair ring, and the others no ornaments at all. Beyond them, serving to define the end of the pit, was a row of clay pots, saucers, and jars. A layer of matting was spread over the floor, and a second layer covered the bodies and the clay vessels. So here we have 4 bodies in front of the coffin, which Woolley assumed to be the servants or lower class individuals of some kind who were sacrificed in service to the individual inside the coffin. And he based this interpretation on the excavation of other tombs that he'd already undertaken. There's a famous royal burial of a queen at which contained 74 other burials. So 68 men and 6 women were buried with this individual, and they were thought to be the servants who had been sacrificed and placed in a death pit to accompany their mistress into the afterlife. When Woolley was excavating the site in the 1920s and 30s, he assumed that these people who ended up in the death pit had been poisoned. However, later analysis of the skeletal material that's at the Penn Museum in the US, in fact, shows that the victims had been bashed over the head. And the current interpretation is that they were killed and arranged in such a manner as to emulate a feast. So we have all of the pots and bowls and ladles, etc., that were buried with these individuals. It's a rather macabre tableau, if you like, and it's the only discovery of this sort of thing in Mesopotamia on such a large scale. There are a handful of earlier examples of potential human sacrifice, but nothing like we see at Ur. So I expect the next time you walk past this dagger in the gallery in Devizes, you will look at it somewhat differently. It's certainly got a great story to tell. Now, the Royal Cemetery at Ur still stands as one of the most significant discoveries in Mesopotamian archaeology, and it caused quite a splash at the time. It was the Mesopotamian equivalent of King Tut as far as the media and the public were concerned, and it really was a big deal when these excavations were happening. They were regularly reported in the newspapers, and they attracted a lot of attention indeed. Now, I'm not sure that I can top that for a story. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I can't top that for a story, but this is the next dagger on display in Devizes. It's 1,000 years later than the dagger from Ur, so we are moving from 2600 BC to 1600 BC, and we are now in Greece. Our next dagger is an Electra-type replica from the Bronze Age city of Mycenae in what is now southern Greece, about 75 miles southwest of Athens. Now, Mycenae was one of the major centres of Greek civilization from around 1600 BC to its peak in 1350 BC. And it had a population of around 30,000 people, and it covered a geographical area of about 25 hectares. The original of the Bronze Age dagger is on display in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. And as you can see here, the handle is missing, and so this is an imaginative reconstruction that's based on similar daggers that have been found on the site. The inlaid gold decoration on the dagger shows cats hunting ducks, a river with fish, and the water plant papyrus. It was found in a grave, which was recorded as Shaft Grave 5, Circle A at the Royal Cemetery, and it was excavated by German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann in 1876. Here we can see a picture of Grave Circle A, where the dagger was found, and the tombs in Grave Circle A. There were 19 burials in total. There were 9 men buried, 8 women, and 2 infants. Now, the people buried in Grave Circle A were the highest in social status in the ancient city, as is shown by the grave goods that accompanied them into the afterlife. Apart from the daggers, these people were also buried with gold jewellery, elaborately decorated vases, decorated swords, and other personal objects. Many of the objects were made from imported materials such as amber, lapis lazuli, faience, and ostrich eggs. And it's been estimated that Grave Circle A had a total of about 15 kilos of gold inside the 19 burials. So here's the replica dagger that's on display in Devizes at the moment, and it was created by a Greek designer and then manufactured by a German tableware company in about 1900. From the time of the Great Tour from the 17th century onwards until the present day, tourists have always wanted to buy souvenir copies of antiquities, and museums and collectors have always wanted to acquire replicas of well-known objects. And so there's always been a market for this kind of stuff. Our third and final dagger on display in Devizes at the museum at the moment is from Egypt. Unfortunately, the curator at the British Museum couldn't tell me much about the history of this particular dagger. It was from a bequest from Sir Robert Mond in 1939, but sadly the find spot is unknown. Mond conducted excavations across Egypt as well as collecting Egyptian antiquities, and so in theory this dagger could have come from any of those sources. It dates to around 2000 BC and the blade is made from bronze. The hilt is made from animal horn and it has gold-headed rivets. There's an ivory pommel as well, as you can see there, and the dagger was made during the golden age of the Middle Kingdom, when ancient Egypt was ruled by pharaohs, and this dagger is another good example of weapons decorated with gold studs. And you can see the gold studs here, 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 and here. So those are the daggers that are on display in Devizes at the moment. Our second empty display case tells the story of the old-born lady, as we have named her for this display. We have on display now in Devizes the early Bronze Age grave group of old-born 4. Much closer to home this time rather than the daggers, and a super exciting time to have this burial on display. This early Bronze Age barrow was excavated by Canon William Greenwell in 1878. There he is. Shortly after he excavated the old-born 4 barrow, he sold his finds and many other objects from the from his collection to the British Museum, and that's where they've remained ever since until now. This is their first trip back to Devizes for display since they were unearthed more than 140 years ago. Canon William Greenwell was Canon of Durham Cathedral. He was the cathedral's librarian and archivist, and he was also a fellow of the Royal Society. However, despite his distinguished career in the church, Greenwell is best known as a prolific excavator of barrows, and he excavated more than 400 early Bronze Age burial mounds, mostly in the north of England. So we could say that he is our northern equivalent to William Cunnington. For those of you familiar with the parish of Oldbourne in North Wiltshire, the Barrow Oldbourne 4 is probably the one that is near the path on Sugar Hill, and it is close to the well-known 4 barrows that you can see pictured here. After some initial digging at the centre of the burial mound, which measured about 28 metres in diameter, Greenwell discovered a pile of large sarsen stones, which had been burnt red by fire. And under those stones were the cremated remains of a woman, and mixed in was the charcoal and ashes from her funeral pyre. Now, the photograph you can see here is from a partially excavated barrow at Oldbourne. We aren't sure which one, but it does show Canon Greenwell and his partner for the Oldbourne excavations. His partner was called Walter Money, and he was from Newbury. So here we have got Canon Greenwell. Here we've got Walter Money. We've got 2 unidentified women in the photograph. Greenwell wasn't married, and unfortunately we don't know who those women are. And then we've got this chap on the far right, and he was probably the digger for the site, but unfortunately we don't have any more details about him. Here you can clearly see the size of the large stone cairn that was inside the burial mound. Helpfully, you can see how big it is in comparison with the people that are standing around it. The Oldbourne lady was buried with 2 incense cups, especially made to be used during her funeral. She also had with her a small bronze knife and 2 bronze awls. And there are a number of amber and fossil beads from a necklace, a button, a ring, and a pendant made from polished jet-coloured shale. These precious objects were carefully laid out for her to take into the next life, and among the ashes covering the cremated woman's remains were some ox and pig bone that had also been burnt, and this is evidence of a funerary feast that had been prepared by her mourners to celebrate her life. So we have the animal bone left over from the feast as part of the excavation archive. So let's take a look at the objects individually, starting with the Oldbourne cups. The first Oldbourne cup with lid that you can see there on the left is a ceramic incense cup that was used as part of the cremation ceremony. And if you look closely, you can see that there are holes in the side and on the lid. So in this photograph, you can see that there is one hole there. And these holes would have allowed the fragrant incense smoke to escape into the air. Both the cup and the lid are beautifully decorated inside and out with V-shapes, diamonds, and triangular patterns. And the decoration was made using a sharp tool that would have been repeatedly pushed into the soft clay. So something like a bone pin or a bronze awl. Similar cups have been found in Wiltshire, but none so beautifully made or with a lid, and it's the lid that makes this cup unique. The second incense cup that you can see on the right was also found inside the barrow, but this one doesn't have a lid. It's also decorated inside and out, and the impressions on the clay are filled with liquefied chalk. So you can see the contrast on both cups where you've got the white dot decoration against the brown fired clay. And the cup without lid was probably also used to burn dry scented plants or special oils that had been created as part of the cremation ceremony. These are the beads that were found as part of the Old Bourne 4 burial, and I grouped them together on this slide so that you can see them side by side. We've got a shale bead fragment here, and it was cut and polished into a barrel shape with a drilled hole through the middle to string onto a necklace. We also have a faience segmented bead that you can see here with the yellow arrow. Faience is a type of glass manufactured using a technique that's found across Europe and Egypt in the Bronze Age. And so again, we can see those long distance trade connections revealing themselves. Now, interestingly, we have other faience beads in the collections in Devizes, and you can see examples here from Winterbourne, Stoke and Amesbury, and you can see how they resemble the beads that were found in Old Bourne 4. There's also an amber bead that was found as part of the burial for Old Bourne 4, but unfortunately it was too fragile to leave the British Museum, so I'm just showing you a photograph of it here. It was also drilled through the centre to string onto a necklace, and again we can see evidence of long distance connections visible as amber comes from the Baltic. It's an exotic material and it was thought to have magical properties. Now, similar amber beads have been found in other burials in barrows across Wiltshire, including the famous Golden Barrow at Upton Lovell, which you can see the amber necklace pictured on the right-hand side of the slide. Other amber necklaces beads have been found in Amesbury, Wilsford, and Winterbourne, Stoke. Lastly, in terms of beads, there's a fossil bead found with the Old Bourne 4 burial, and it's pictured on the left-hand side here. And rare materials like this sea lily fossil were highly desirable for making jewellery in the early Bronze Age. They were highly desirable, and they were sometimes passed down through the generations as family heirlooms, and similar beads have been found inside barrows at Winterbourne, Stoke, which you can see here. And these beads from Winterbourne, Stoke had also been used to form a simple bead necklace, which also had fired clay and shell beads with it. There are also a number of shale objects found with the Old Bourne burial, and shale is a sedimentary rock that's formed over millions of years from mud and clay minerals. And the mud, much of it was mined at Kimmeridge in Dorset. A lot of this shale comes from Kimmeridge in Dorset, and it was used extensively in the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and right through to the Roman period to make jewellery and other pieces of personal objects, ornaments, treasured possessions. Starting with the cone-shaped pendant that you can see here, number 10. It's much smaller and squatter than other examples of cone-shaped pendants found in Wiltshire graves. I was quite surprised when we unwrapped it to actually see how small it was. Like others, though, it's been cut and polished with a perforated V hole so it could be suspended onto a piece of string or leather. Two larger examples of cone shell pendants have been found in Wiltshire, and these were covered in sheet gold. We can see here we've got one from Upton Lovell and one from Wilsford, and the one at Upton Lovell was found in the same grave as we've just seen the beautiful amber necklace. The one at Wilsford was found in another female grave, and it was also found with amber and incense cups. So we're starting to see a pattern here of what was typically buried with female individuals in early Bronze Age graves. Both the gold examples are decorated with lines and zigzags, whereas the Oldbourne example is smaller and undecorated. The central perforation that is at the base of the cone-shaped pendant, which unfortunately you can't see from this image, suggests that the pendant hung around the neck plumb bob-like as a pendant, so it would have hung down with the point downwards. There's also a polished belt shell ring with the Oldbourne for burial, and it's similar to others that have been found in Winterbourne, Stoke, Avebury, Durrington and Upton Lovell. And these belt rings were typically used to secure a piece of leather or textile around the waist to hold clothing in place. So again, we've got a parallel here in another grave at Winterbourne, Stoke, for the shell belt ring that's in the Oldbourne for burial. And lastly, we have a rather unusual polished shale pendant that would have been worn around the neck on a piece of leather or string. You can see it here with the yellow arrow. Now, this object is in absolutely fantastic condition, and it looks as though it could have been made yesterday. It's more unique in its shape. It was far easier for me to find parallels for the other objects in these burials and compare them to other Wiltshire graves. But this object is a little bit more unique, and I'm not sure I've seen anything quite like it in a certainly in a Wiltshire grave. So this is a really quite a special object, and it's so highly polished and perfect that it does look like jet, but the British Museum curator assures me that it is made from shale. The two final objects from the Oldbourne 4 grave are a bronze awl fragment. Now, these are commonly found in early Bronze Age graves, and the awl may have been used to decorate the two incense cups found with the burial. You remember I said that we have the small pin prick decoration pushed into the soft clay. It could have been the awl that produced that decoration, or the awl could have been a piercing tool used for leather or woodworking, as we commonly see in early Bronze Age contexts. And we also have this rather lovely little polished bivalve fossil. Other polished fossil shells have been found in Wiltshire graves, including one at Winterbourne, Stoke, and one at Warminster, and it's the Warminster one that you can see here. And it's the barrow of Warminster, it's the fossil shell from inside the barrow of the Warminster grave that really caught my imagination. It was found with the body of a woman who was buried with a child inside a stone kist. And the infant had with him or her this small fossil shell. So we have a woman that was buried with a child, so a mother possibly buried with a son or daughter. And with this child was this beautiful little polished fossil. It was no doubt a treasured item and an object of deep personal significance to take into the afterlife to keep it safe. And I feel that that's a really poignant place to end as we're looking at these really special grave goods that were buried with the Oldbourne 4 lady. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. Please do go and see the new Stonehenge exhibition at the British Museum. It's on until the 17th of July. It's well worth a visit. And please come and see our new finds on display in Devizes. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me talk this evening. and I hope you enjoy the new exhibits that we have in the prehistoric Wiltshire galleries. Bush Barrow and the Shaman burial will be returning in August, and so you have the next few months to come along and see our new displays. Thank you very much.
The disembodied voice. And just before Lisa comes back, I just want to also talk about what else we get out of the relationship with the British Museum, which is one of the things that they really understood, is that we're a very small museum and we need all the help we can get. And that, as I put it, it was really funny. We had a meeting with the British Museum team, and there was myself and Karen. On the other side, there were, I think, Lisa may well have been there as well. On the other side, there are about 20 people from sort of membership and marketing and retail, and all these people from different departments, and there was just the few of us. And I made the point to the British Museum that it was us lending them Bush Barrow and the Shaman was a bit like them lending the Rosetta Stone, the Parthenon marbles, and Sutton Hoo all at the same time. And one of the things that they're doing for us is they're going to be promoting our not just visits to the museum, which they've done through their newsletter for their members, and they're also running a special trip. But also they're going to be promoting our Thomas Hardy exhibition. So on Thursday, Muggins is going to be chairing a talk about art and Stonehenge with Jeremy Deller, where Harriet Still, who's the curator for the Hardy exhibition, is going to be talking about the link between Hardy and Stonehenge. And also then they'll be promoting the exhibition on social media once we open at the end of May. So we get quite a lot out of it as well. So, we're not, well, are we stupid, Lisa?
No.
Probably not entirely. Okay, so I just thought that's quite interesting, just to see that the British Museum recognise how difficult it is for independent museums like ourselves and Salisbury and the Dorset Museum, all of whom all of us have lent to the exhibition. So I think now, if you're ready, Lisa, we'll hand over to questions. The first is from Sonia. This is a cracking one. Is there any evidence of what the incense in incense cups was?
Now, there has been a study on that, hasn't there? I don't know if there's been anything in the way of analysis inside the cups. I can't quite remember. Do you remember, David? We did have someone come and look at some incense cups, but it was about 10 years ago, and I don't think they took samples.
Yeah, I don't think they did, but I don't think that they, I know there's someone who has been researching more recently. I'm not sure if they actually came to see us, but they haven't published yet.
Yes.
So it's one of those things where, they may have completed a PhD thesis that sort of disappeared into the university, but we've not seen the results of that. Certainly, when I've been chatting to people like Alison Sheridan, and it's probably where I got this from, is she commented that it could have been the name incense cup was actually given to them by William Cunnington, because he thought that was what they were used for. But it could also have been things like hemp seeds or hemp leaves, in other words, cannabis, potentially poppy seeds. And or magic mushrooms. So it could have been any of those things, and it's been suggested that you sort of ingest the smoke and that puts you into a trance, so you can talk to the sort of people in the other world, sort of thing. All of which is quite fun, but there's no evidence that I know of.
No, and I think having something fragrant would really help with the smell on the graveside, to be honest. So I'm not quite sure about the indigenous plants that were around at the time, but something that was particularly fragrant would probably be quite helpful, because this is obviously before any sort of embalming process, and we don't know how long the body was out for the morning.
Yeah, well, it would take them quite a while to prepare. although you might have had the cremation fairly quickly, you know, that you know, you could have done sort of that metaphorically the next day. These things are so elaborate, and the sort of firing of the incense cup makes you think that actually there was probably quite a long time between death and the cremation and then the burial. And as you say, you probably needed something to mask the smell. The other, I don't know whether that would work. I know that in some burials they found meadowsweet flowers. There was one up in Perth where the meadowsweet was very well preserved in the burial. So again, you know, there are things in the burial that generally we don't see because they've disappeared.
It would be a good bit of experimental archaeology without the body.
I can say you offering. Nice comment from Louise, who says, "Well done on all your hard work. You sound very protective of the objects. Will you be relieved when they come back safely?"
Yeah, protective is probably right. I've been doing the job.
Bit of an understatement, I think.
I've been doing the job for 17 years, and I'm very attached to the objects, particularly the Stowhead collection, the early Bronze Age collection. It's something that I first encountered when I did my work experience at the museum when I was 16. So I've got a very long connection with the museum, and it's somewhere that I always wanted to work. I'm sure some of you have heard David say that before as well. So we've both ended up where we want to be. And yes, I will be very relieved when I have unpacked all the objects and I've seen that they're okay and they're back in their display cases in devices. And I think that most curators are like that, to be honest.
Yeah, and of course we've got, just some of you will know this, we've also got objects at the moment in Germany at Herne Museum, where they are till October, I think is when it now finishes.
Yes, it's been extended by a month, so they'll be coming back to the UK in November, and we've just had some objects come back from Halle in Germany as well, so we've got lots of toing and froing at the moment.
And we've got the other set that were out in the United States and now in New Zealand, then going to Australia and possibly on to China.
Yes.
So you sleep well at nights, do you, Lisa?
Not too bad.
Yeah. Then David has said, "Thank you for a fascinating talk. Wiltshire is relatively a modern construct." Quite right. Are there comparable objects from neighbouring counties, or is what we've seen unique to the chalk downland of Wiltshire?
We definitely see similar objects in Dorset, for example. There's something very similar to Bush Barrow in Dorset, the Clandon burial. And so, yeah, across Wessex, there are many similarities in the early Bronze Age burial mounds. Definitely, it's not specifically to Wiltshire, but dare I say Wiltshire has the best.
And the BM exhibition is fantastic reminder of that, because they've got the Clandon burial, which is the one you're talking about, which is comparable but not as good as Bush Barrow, and there's another one from is it Great Cressingham, I think, in East Anglia, and there are sun discs like the one you mentioned in Ireland, which I have to say are probably rather more impressive than ours, but never mind. And then the sheet gold cover for the shale pendants that you mentioned. There are some very similar. There's a very similar one in Ireland that was sort of highlighted recently, and also in the exhibition is two sheet gold things from the Ness of Trotties, wonderfully named, in Orkney. So there are similar things around, but nothing like the number and the quantity in Wiltshire. Part of that is because of the Cunnington was excavating very early, but there's more to it than that. So it's partly the early excavation, partly preservation, but actually there's just more here anyway, I think.
And we've got this great concentration of early Bronze Age burials, of course, because we're slap bang in the middle of the World Heritage Sites for Avebury and Stonehenge. So there's a real concentration of importance in this area.
Yeah. Makes you wonder two things. One is about the rich burials that probably are around Marden. There's lots of barrows, but none of them excavated. And then at Oldbourne, where's the henge?
Yes, yes,
It's
exactly.
like, where's the henge by Marlborough?
Mm,
Well, actually, we're pretty sure we know that there is a henge under Marlborough, which goes with the Marlborough Lady burial. Catherine has said, perhaps we should ask for the return of the Oldbourne Lady, I assume permanently. Well, maybe we should. But the Oldbourne Cup's normally on display in the BM, isn't it?
yes, it is. It's the only object in the grave group that is on display, but it's one of it's been on display for a long time at the BM. The cup with the lid, the other cup, isn't normally on display. So yeah, that's the only display item. The rest of it's in store. I'm not sure I'm ready to embark on that quite yet.
Sally has asked, can you explain a bit more about the use of liquefied chalk to decorate the pottery? Was it a widespread technique? Is it what was used on the pottery from the West Kennet Barrow?
It was used quite a lot, but not to the extent. It was really beautifully done with the Oldbourne Cup, which makes it stand out. The decoration for the Oldbourne Cup inside and out, which is quite unusual to have such decoration on the inside as well. So, but yes, that liquefied chalk, just to bring out that contrast between the pinprick decoration and the brown of the clay, you can see that in other examples of early Bronze Age pottery for sure.
Yeah, we've got the roundway beaker. Has got that as well. But I think the other thing I can suggest is you go, and it's something you could go and do, is go and visit Oldbourne Heritage Centre, where they've got two replicas of the Oldbourne Cup made by Graham Taylor. He's better known as Potted History. And if you search on YouTube, you'll see there's a video of him making those or talking about the replicas. I'm pretty sure of those two. And he talks in detail about how those were made. So do go and see Oldbourne Heritage Centre, and then you can go and visit the Four Barrows, and then see Oldbourne 4, which is just below, just by the side of the road up to Swindon. That technique wasn't used on the pottery from West Kennet Barrow, no. And just one other feature to add. That's if I hope you've had your dinner a little while, which is there are some pots that use crushed cremated bone, some of which is human, just to be gross.
Everybody likes a bit of gross. It's the human sacrifice. It's a theme.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Which reminds me, of course, there's you talked about the shaman, and of course we don't know how the woman that was buried alongside the shaman, what happened to her. No, she may have been put in afterwards when she died naturally, or there is also the possibility, of course, that she had her throat slit and was chucked in to accompany him.
It's the fact that she's sitting up and her head's quite near the top of the barrow.
Yeah, Cunnington says it's about 2 or 3 inches from the top of the barrow.
Yeah,
it's just weird.
It is weird. Yeah, she's not laying down in the flex position or anything like that. She appears to be sitting up and quite near the surface.
Yeah. And there's just one last comment, unless anyone else is going to add one while we're talking, which is Graham says, could the Oldbourne Cup been a sieve for a libation containing oils and herbs, etc.?
I don't know is the answer to that. I don't think there are enough holes for it to be sieve-like.
Yeah, certainly the other Oldbourne Cup has no holes, does it? And many incense cups don't have holes.
I think I can remember there is one hole on the cup without the lid, But again, I think that's more about letting the heat out and letting the smoke out, so that you don't maybe get a crack in the pottery if you get too much of a build-up of heat. But there aren't a huge number of holes in the cups, so not sieve-like.
Graham says like a pepper cup. Now I have to say I have no idea what a pepper cup is, but
I don't know what a pepper cup is.
Oh, good, good company then.
Pepper pot. Oh yeah, I know what a pepper
pot
is. Oh, I see. Yeah.
No.
Sure.
No, it wouldn't work. Nice try. Just the fit. Yeah. It. Sorry, it wouldn't work. I see what you mean, but it wouldn't work.
The holes in the top of the cup that's got the lid, some people have said, is that for suspension? But now
because it goes through.
Yeah, but actually the lid would just come straight off. If you tried to suspend it, it would come away from the base of the pot. So I don't think so. I think it's more about letting the smoke and dissipate from inside the cup.
And as you say, the heat, which it can be quite a problem if you're putting hot things into a pot before it's got a chance to warm up. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's it. So thank you, Lisa. Absolutely fascinating. As ever, I learned a huge amount. I hadn't known about the death pit for the dagger before, so I've got a new set of stories to tell people.
Yeah, when we originally agreed the loan for the dagger, I didn't know about the death pit, and it was only when I was talking to the fantastic Nancy Highcock, who's the Middle East curator at the British Museum. I was asking for her for more material for the talk, that she started to send me the notebooks and unpublished reports from Woolly's excavations. So we've got more of a story to tell now, which is really great, but I didn't share it with anybody. I wanted the members to hear it first, so we'll spread it far and wide now, because it is a fantastic story. And yeah, I look at that dagger very, very differently now.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. Remember the talk on Thursday with the British Museum. We put that out on Facebook and Twitter, or if you just Google go to the British Museum website, you'll see about that talk. 5:30 on Thursday, and Muggins is chairing it, but the important people are Jeremy Della and Harriet Still, and an artist whose name I've forgotten, who has done an amazing picture of Stonehenge. So that's going to be worth looking for. And with that, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Lisa, and good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.